18 years ago, two young college students vanished on the way to New Haven during what was supposed to be a short trip, disappearing completely without a trace and nearly destroying their families. Authorities suspected a man who had been seen in the area might be involved, but with no bodies and not enough leads to pursue, the entire investigation quickly stalled. Yet for all those long years, the families clung desperately to the faint hope that their children were somehow still alive somewhere. Then one day, when investigators re-examined old evidence using new forensic technology, they discovered one tiny detail that had been overlooked for more than a decade, a detail powerful enough to turn the entire case upside down and shock everyone involved. Before we dive deep into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit subscribe. November 2007. Connecticut was sliding into early winter, with a damp, bone-chilling cold that crept from the dark forest roads to the small towns along the highway, where late afternoon fog settled over old rooftops and bare trees lined the corridor from West Hartford down to New Haven. In that setting, 19-year-old Elena Marquez, a freshman at a local university, and 20-year-old Liam Porter, a part-time employee at a home improvement store, were getting ready for a routine short trip, heading to New Haven to pick up pre-ordered HVAC parts for Liam's family. It was something he did whenever his dad needed help, and Elena was tagging along because her classes had ended early that day. The last person to see them was a neighbor standing in his front yard, who watched them leave West Hartford in the family's old blue Ford Aerostar, the van the Porters had been driving for over a decade. Nothing in their appearance or behavior suggested anything unusual, just two young people heading out for a quick errand and planning to be back by evening. But as night fell, and Elena didn't return to her dorm, as Liam didn't come home, and there were no texts or calls, the silence started to stretch in a strange way. By the next morning, when Elena missed her classes and Liam didn't show up for his early shift, real worry set in for their families and everyone around them. Every attempt to call just rang uselessly before going dead. Both phones appeared to have stopped working shortly after they left. The families searched all the usual places, contacted friends, and anywhere they might have stopped, but no one had any idea where they'd gone after driving away from West Hartford. When every normal explanation no longer fit, and the families couldn't find any new trace, they had to accept that Elena and Liam's disappearance was out of their control, and decided to report it to the authorities. The next morning, when the Marquez and Porter families arrived at the West Hartford Police Department to report that both were missing after a short trip to New Haven, the desk officers immediately took the information and recognized how unusual the situation was. Two young people losing contact at the exact same time, both with clear schedules and responsibilities for school and work, rarely missing anything without notice. This wasn't the typical runaway or sudden change of plans case. To start the risk assessment process, police collected all background details about the trip. The purpose was confirmed as picking up pre-ordered HVAC parts at a store in New Haven. The most logical route from West Hartford was along the I-91 corridor, busy but easy to trace. The time they left home was confirmed by the neighbor witness and matched the family's statements. These initial facts helped police build a fairly solid timeline of the journey they were supposed to take. Next, to rule out a traffic accident, police contacted Connecticut State Police, night patrol units, and highway monitoring divisions, reviewing every accident report between West Hartford and New Haven within the window. Elena and Liam could have been traveling. No vehicle matched the description of the Ford Aerostar, and no breakdowns or unusual stops were recorded. That eliminated part of the possibility of an unintended incident on the road. With accidents not confirmed, police shifted to checking the victim's communication activity. Cell tower pings along the I-91 corridor showed both phones went dead almost simultaneously, not long after leaving West Hartford. In 2007, ping data was crude, only giving broad areas, not precise locations, but two devices going dark at the same moment drew special attention. Normally, a young person might run out of battery, lose signal, or turn the phone off. But both shutting down together with no further activity was a red flag for involuntary interruption. Police also checked recent financial activity for Elena and Liam, bank card transactions, ATM withdrawals, payments at the HVAC store, or anything in New Haven. Everything showed no activity after they left home, reinforcing that they never reached their planned destination. No shopping, entertainment, hotel stays, or anything typical of a spontaneous schedule change. This helped rule out more possibilities. Based on everything gathered, phones going dead at the same time, no accident evidence, no financial activity, no response from the victims, and both failing to appear where they were expected. Police began assessing the real risk level of the disappearance. Following protocol, they evaluated the victims' independence, the reliability of family information, their normal behavior, and the abnormality in communication status. Everything pointed to one conclusion: this wasn't a case that could be left to resolve itself before intervention. The missing persons file was classified as high risk, meaning police would have to launch expanded searches, cross-district coordination, and early trace efforts sooner than usual, because the likelihood that the two victims had encountered a situation beyond their control was becoming clear. After completing the initial assessment and determining high risk, West Hartford police launched searches along the most likely route Elena and Liam would have taken, looking for any sign of where they went after leaving West Hartford. The default route was the stretch connecting their residential area to New Haven, with I-91 as the main artery, plus some possible side roads depending on traffic. To cover everything, patrol teams were assigned segments, each handling groups of potential stops from Hartford down to the New Haven suburbs, independent gas stations, late-night convenience stores, parking lots near park entrances or trails, and areas drivers often use for short breaks. These spots were chosen because they were places the pair might have stopped while traveling and where cameras or employees might have recorded the Ford Aerostar. A series of gas stations in Hartford, Wethersfield, Cromwell, and Wallingford were checked first, as they were common stops on a 40-plus minute drive. Investigators spoke directly with clerks, asking about unusual transactions or customers around the time Elena and Liam lost contact. However, most locations no longer had camera footage, partly because in 2007 many systems only kept recordings for a short time, and partly because image quality was so poor that identifying vehicles or people was nearly impossible. Still, police reviewed whatever usable video remained, analyzing frame by frame for the blue Aerostar, but the images were either too blurry, didn't cover the parking areas, or had been overwritten. Outdoor cameras suffered from low light and weather conditions that made many recordings unusable. After the major stations, police expanded to less obvious areas, side road parking lots, park entrances, stretches near hills, in Wallingford and North Haven, places sometimes used for quick stops between towns. Some small lots had no cameras, but officers still checked the ground for tire tracks, dropped items, or anything relevant. Everything came up empty. No one had seen the van, and no residents along the route reported a vehicle parked oddly or drawing attention. To make sure they didn't miss the possibility that Elena and Liam took a less common intersection, police also swept secondary roads like Route 5 and Route 15, sometimes used to avoid congestion. Despite multiple teams and questioning night shift workers at roadside businesses, no data showed the Aerostar ever appeared on any check segment. At the same time, police contacted the Department of Transportation to review highway surveillance cameras. Some DOT cameras recorded periodically but weren't designed for long-term storage. Most data had been overwritten or only existed as snapshots, providing no full picture. The few remaining frames showed no Aerostar passing checkpoints during the relevant time. Investigators also considered whether they might have exited I-91 earlier than expected into a residential area or shopping center, but the complete lack of financial transactions or contact made that theory unsupported. After nearly a full day of continuous searching, police compiled everything from potential stops, available cameras, and patrol reports, reaching a critical conclusion within the initial search area. there was zero trace of the Ford Aerostar or any evidence that Elena and Liam had passed through places they logically should have. This pushed the investigation into a tougher phase because the expected route left no identifying markers, meaning at some point their journey had veered off the normal path without leaving a trace. Immediately after the Hartford, New Haven route search yielded nothing useful, West Hartford police, together with units from Wallingford, North Haven, and New Haven, shifted to expanded searches in forested and rugged areas along the corridor Elena and Liam most likely traveled. The initial focus was two large areas, Sleeping Giant State Park and West Rock Ridge, both just minutes from I-91, heavily wooded, with steep terrain, old trails, and secluded turnoffs that could easily become unofficial stops in an emergency. To ensure nothing related to the Ford Aerostar or the victims was missed, police deployed layered search teams, starting at the edges of major roads, shoulders, and open lots, then moving deeper into the woods. Highway Patrol checked along I-91's edges, paying special attention to split-level sections where a vehicle could suddenly stop. They searched places where a car might slide down an embankment, gentle ditches or drainage channels, but found no tire marks, scrape marks, dropped items or collision signs. Next, police expanded to parallel local roads, with many small turnoffs leading to neighborhoods, farms, or rarely used trails. Each turnoff was manually checked, looking for fresh tire tracks, strange objects on the pavement, even minor vegetation changes that might suggest recent vehicle or foot traffic. Again, the entire area around these roads provided no clues. In parallel with roadside searches, the main effort focused on Sleeping Giant State Park, a large area known for intersecting trails, exposed rock ledges, and paths leading deep into the woods. Search teams swept in a line pattern, main trails first, then side branches and old footpaths. They checked steep drop-offs, large rock crevices, low water areas, and ridge edges, places where items are often dropped or where someone might pull over in an emergency. K-9 units were brought in, but the scent trails they picked up never led to anything connected to Elena or Liam, and were repeatedly disrupted by the layered natural smells of the terrain. At West Rock Ridge, the terrain was even more complex with vertical cliffs and narrow climbing routes. Teams had to split into smaller groups for safety, while thoroughly checking every spot where a person or vehicle might stop. They examined roadside pull-offs, small dirt lots near hiking trail entrances, and emergency exits to Route 15. But again got no positive results. Investigators paid attention to locations previously used as makeshift parking or meeting spots, but rain and wind had altered surfaces so much that vehicle traces from days earlier were nearly impossible to confirm. Throughout the entire search, police stayed alert for anything that could have been dropped. Papers, clothing, bags, personal items, anything suggesting Elena and Liam had stopped or passed through, but no related objects were found. Not a single detail, however small, emerged to indicate the Aerostar's direction after leaving West Hartford. When this expanded search phase ended, police had to record that the forested and remote areas along the route provided no trace of Elena, Liam, or their vehicle. The absence of personal items or crime scene signs widened the information gap even further, leaving the investigation in a difficult state, with no clear foothold for the next steps. Right after the sweeping of large forested areas and remote road sections yielded no specific signs whatsoever, the Inter-District Search Force decided to switch to an advanced grid search method, a technique that requires tight coordination among multiple teams and is suitable for sweeping vast areas without clear points of suspicion. Dividing the entire forest region along I-91 into grid squares allowed each team to be responsible for a designated section, conducting linear searches with even coverage and minimizing the chance of missing small pieces of evidence. Each grid square was marked on topographic maps and cross-referenced with handheld GPS units, although GPS accuracy in 2007 was still limited. The search teams moved slowly, examining the ground surface, tree hollows, rocks, drainage ditches, and any places where items might have fallen or become caught. Every member of the team had to maintain equal spacing to ensure their fields of vision did not overlap yet remained close enough to fully cover the grid according to protocol. However, after many hours of continuous sweeping, no personal belongings, tire tracks, scraps of fabric, or any type of evidence that could be linked to Elena and Liam were found. This result further reinforced the assessment that if the Aerostar had stopped or turned into this forested area, it either left no clear traces or had passed through locations where terrain changes had erased minor marks. In parallel with the grid search, K9 units were deployed to exploit scent tracking capabilities using items provided by the families of Elena and Liam, but the K9 team's activities did not produce consistent results. In a few areas on the edge of Sleeping Giant Forest, some dogs showed mild reactions to scent, but quickly lost the trail deeper along the paths, possibly due to strong winds, high humidity, or the mixing of many wild animal odors. The constant interruption of the scent trail prevented the search force from identifying any stable direction of movement, meaning they could not rely on canine signals to narrow down a target zone. In addition to the two main forest zones, search teams also checked narrow tree lines along secondary roads, nearby parking lots, and open patches of ground where a vehicle might have stopped. In several instances, team members found objects that initially seemed relevant: a soda can, a piece of cloth, a soaked piece of paper, but all were verified as unrelated to Elena and Liam. Having to repeatedly rule out false leads made the search perimeter increasingly vague. As the search expanded to locations outside the main forest areas, police began receiving scattered witness statements from residents living near the highway corridor. Some reported seeing a dark-colored vehicle driving unusually slowly near Wallingford. Another said they heard a car door slam loudly near the park entrance on the night Elena and Liam left home. Someone else claimed to have seen a young man and woman standing next to an old green van. However, when asked for exact times, license plate details, or identifying characteristics of the individuals, most witnesses could not provide specific data or gave contradictory descriptions. Some statements were affected by poor lighting, long distance, or inaccurate memory due to the passage of time. Moreover, the period when Elena and Liam disappeared coincided with days of heavy traffic, making visual identification by witnesses highly unreliable. After compiling all reports from the grid search system, K9 scent tracking results, and fragmented community statements, police found that the overall picture of Elena and Liam's possible movements remained extremely unclear. No physical trace confirmed they had stopped or turned off the main route. K9 data was insufficient for orientation. Witness information lacked the reliability needed to form concrete hypotheses. The entire advanced search process produced no clear direction of travel or direct leads, forcing police to acknowledge that the areas they had expected might contain traces were completely empty, and the journey of Elena and Liam continued to be shrouded in gaps that no search effort during this phase could fill. Many days after search teams had thoroughly checked both the main highway and vast forested areas, yet still found no trace related to Elena and Liam, the first significant piece of information in the case since their disappearance finally emerged. On a late afternoon, a security officer at the Quinnipiac University campus in Hamden reported to police that an old green van had been parked in a low-traffic area behind a classroom building. What drew the officer's attention was not any suspicious behavior, but the fact that the vehicle had been there since morning and had not moved, while students and faculty in the area constantly rotated parking spots. When police were notified, a patrol unit was dispatched to check the vehicle. Although the van showed no signs of break-in, theft, or damage, its color and model unexpectedly matched the Ford Aerostar that Elena and Liam had used to leave West Hartford. A quick license plate check revealed a perfect match with the Porter family's vehicle, confirming that this was indeed the van the two young people had been driving on the night they vanished. This confirmation instantly shifted the investigation's focus, as the van became the only direct piece of evidence recovered since their disappearance. Yet the van's appearance provided no easy answers. There were no indications that Elena or Liam had been anywhere near it on the day it was discovered, and no witnesses in the surrounding area had seen them exit the vehicle or wander around campus. Police quickly expanded the search radius around the parking spot, looking for dropped items or signs of activity, but the ground, part of a moderately trafficked campus, revealed nothing noteworthy. The complete absence of the two victims at the very place their vehicle was found confronted police with a paradox. The van had been quietly abandoned, with no signs of forceful impact, no mechanical failure, no suggestion of hurried departure or struggle inside. Yet there was also no evidence that they had voluntarily left the area. This forced investigators to treat the van's location as a potential crime scene, even though no direct evidence proved an incident had occurred there. To preserve the integrity of any possible evidence on or inside the vehicle, the scene around it was secured, following standard protocol. Police taped off the area, documented the vehicle's exact position, photographed it from multiple angles, and created a diagram correlating the parking spot with the nearest entrances and exits. Preliminary documentation was carried out meticulously, recording the time of discovery, lighting conditions, weather, door status, wheel positions, and distances to fixed campus landmarks. This documentation was especially critical because even minor changes could affect the accuracy of later forensic analyses. Once documentation was complete, and it was ensured no one had touched the vehicle before forensic processing began, police sealed the entire van using specialized evidence tape on all doors, the trunk, and any opening seams. The purpose was to guarantee that no individual, not even off-duty officers, could interfere with the vehicle before it was transported to the Connecticut State Police Forensic Center. During sealing, investigators did not open doors or inspect the interior beyond visual observation through the windows, because any contact prior to controlled forensic handling could alter, contaminate, or destroy valuable biological and physical traces. After sealing, a flatbed tow truck was called to campus. Police followed standard procedure for a suspect vehicle. The van was lifted and secured without disturbing door handles, floor mats, seats, or any surface that might hold biological evidence. The Aerostar's destination was the CSP Forensic Center. Equipped with the tools and techniques needed to collect fingerprints, shoe prints, fiber samples, DNA, or any other evidence possibly left in the van on the night Elena and Liam disappeared. Transport was conducted cautiously, with escort vehicles front and rear to prevent collisions or excessive vibration. As the vehicle left the Quinnipiac campus and headed to the forensic lab, police knew that recovering the van had provided the first real piece of the missing person puzzle, but the total absence of Elena and Liam at the scene raised a host of new questions they had no answers for yet, making the van the first key, however unclear its ultimate value, in the effort to understand what had happened to the two young people on what was supposed to be a simple trip. Once the Ford Aerostar was brought into the vehicle processing bay of the Connecticut State Police Forensic Center, the crime scene team quickly prepared for a detailed examination to determine what traces the vehicle might hold that could explain what had happened to Elena and Liam since leaving West Hartford. The entire process took place inside a sealed access-controlled garage, equipped with specialized air filtration systems to prevent contamination by airborne particles. Before touching any surface, technicians photographed the vehicle in full and in sections: windshield, windows, door handles, side mirrors, hood, front and rear bumpers, wheels, and undercarriage. These images served as the baseline record, so any changes during forensic processing could be compared to the original state, eliminating the possibility of reporting errors. When moving to direct contact, the team used gloves, UV lights, fingerprint powder, and micro-sampling tools to examine the exterior surfaces. Fingerprints were lifted from door handles, door frames, the trunk edge, window edges, and metal areas around the front doors. Some prints matched Liam's, unsurprising since it was his family vehicle, but mixed among them were prints that did not match any samples from relatives or regular drivers of the van. These unidentified prints showed no signs of force, but their placement on the passenger side handle and part of the rear window glass was noteworthy because the pattern was inconsistent with typical owner contact. In addition to fingerprints, technicians collected fibers and adhered particles from exterior surfaces using specialized adhesive tape. Some fibers were colors that did not match the clothing Elena and Liam were described as wearing when they left home. These fibers were labeled, categorized, and sent to the fiber analysis lab to determine composition, material, and possible connection to a specific person or object. When moving to the interior, technicians opened each door in sequence, photographing and documenting every action to maintain chain of custody integrity. The interior was scanned with UV light for spatter or fluid trails that fluoresce, but no signs of blood or easily identifiable biological material appeared on seats, carpets, or the dashboard. However, under the front passenger seat, the team recovered a light-colored latex glove in good condition that was not listed among the vehicle's usual contents. The glove was collected using special protocol for items potentially containing contact DNA. On the floor behind the driver's seat, technicians found a white zip tie mixed in with old magazines and an empty plastic bag. The zip tie's location did not correspond to any common item the Porter family normally kept in the van, and it was collected under the same protocol as the latex glove. The fact that both the glove and zip tie are items associated with restraint or control made them the focal point of detailed analysis. While continuing the examination, the team used swabs to collect touch DNA from the steering wheel, gear shift, dashboard, door armrests, seat belts, and other frequently touched areas. These swabs were later taken to the DNA lab to test for skin cells or sweat. When analysis was complete, an unknown DNA profile appeared in samples from the door handles and seat belts that did not match any previously collected samples from the victims or their families. This profile was labeled Profile X and immediately entered into the FBI's National CODIS database for comparison. In the next phase of forensic processing, items like the latex glove and zip tie were examined for fingerprints, fibers, or biological material on their surfaces. The latex glove yielded a small amount of skin cells inside, which were extracted and processed for DNA. The zip tie showed no clear fingerprints, but had trace biological material on the locking head, indicating it had been handled or used. All DNA samples from these items, once analyzed, matched Profile X, confirming the presence of a third individual, besides Elena and Liam, in or around the vehicle during a time frame relevant to their disappearance. When the investigative team received the CODIS comparison results, they quickly determined that Profile X did not match any record in the database at that time. This meant the person who left traces on the Ford Aerostar had no prior arrests, was not in the criminal DNA system, and had never been compelled to provide a DNA sample to state or federal law enforcement. That result elevated Profile X to the most important lead obtained from the van because it proved a previously unidentified person had been present in or around the vehicle at a time connected to Elena and Liam's disappearance. Although the absence of a CODIS hit made identifying the individual more difficult, the team knew the vehicle examination had confirmed the existence of an unknown player in the events that led to the victim's disappearance, and it was the first substantive evidence capable of shifting the direction of an investigation that had previously lacked any direct information about who might be involved. After the Ford Aerostar had been towed from the scene and transported to the forensic center for examination, the investigative team returned to the Quinnipiac area with a new focus, extracting and analyzing footage from all security cameras surrounding the location where the vehicle was discovered, in order to pinpoint the exact time the van appeared on campus and determine whether any footage captured the driver or any individual approaching the vehicle before it was found. The university's security center provided a complete list of operational cameras in the area, including one pointed at the auxiliary parking lot behind the academic building, one covering the pedestrian walkway, and two mounted at building corners. However, most of these cameras only retained footage for a limited period. Several recordings had already been automatically overwritten on a rolling cycle, especially those from too far before the vehicle's discovery, meaning a significant amount of potentially valuable data no longer existed. The remaining video segments were downloaded by police and examined frame by frame. In the time frame closest to the vehicle's discovery, the parking lot camera captured some blurry movement, mostly student and faculty vehicles entering and exiting the area. The blue van appeared in only a single frame from a wide-angle lens, but the image was far too grainy to determine an exact time or read the license plate. Notably, no footage clearly showed anyone exiting the vehicle or the process of the van being parked in that spot. Poor lighting, distant camera angles, and relatively low-resolution equipment made it practically impossible to analyze the driver's silhouette. Another clip from the pedestrian walkway camera recorded motion during the same time window, but it only showed shadowy figures, and it was impossible to tell whether they were connected to the Aerostar or simply students passing by. No segment captured anyone opening or closing the doors, moving around the vehicle, or behaving suspiciously, making it far more difficult than initially expected to determine who had driven the van there. After reviewing all available video, police shifted to gathering witness statements in the area. They re-interviewed the security officer who first reported the vehicle, asking exactly when he had noticed it. The officer recalled that the van was not present the previous night, but could not pinpoint when it appeared that morning, since the auxiliary lot was not an area he monitored continuously. Other night shift staff were asked if they had noticed any unusual vehicles, but none remembered seeing a van matching the Porter family's description. Investigators continued taking statements from students whose schedules placed them near the parking lot during the likely window when the van was brought in. One female student said she had seen a dark-colored vehicle parked in that spot early in the morning, but couldn't say when it arrived or confirm it was definitely the Aerostar. Another student thought he had seen a tall man get out of a vehicle around the relevant time, but when pressed for details about appearance, clothing, or direction of movement, he could provide nothing specific, citing the darkness, his own hurry, and poor visibility. Another witness reported seeing a vehicle moving slowly through the area the previous evening, but when cross-checked with video, no camera recorded it, rendering the information unverifiable. A few additional statements mentioned a strange blue van in the general vicinity days earlier, but upon closer review, the timelines described did not match the period when Elena and Liam disappeared. Every statement was documented and compared against the video evidence, yet no witness provided definitive information about how the van arrived, who was driving it, or whether anyone else was with the vehicle. Beyond the timing issue, obtaining a usable physical description of the suspect proved impossible. No witness had a close enough view to identify clothing color, build, or distinguishing features. Most accounts were limited to vague phrases like a tall man, a shadowy figure walking, or a dark-colored vehicle, rendering them of little practical investigative value. After compiling all camera data and statements from people who lived, worked, or passed near the location where the Ford Aerostar was found, the investigative team's overall conclusion was that no direct evidence existed to establish exactly when the van was brought onto the Quinnipiac campus, nor was there any clear footage identifying the driver. The cameras captured no suspicious activity, and witness statements were fragmented, lacked credibility, or contradicted one another regarding timing and details. This made reconstructing the timeline from when the vehicle left West Hartford to when it was abandoned far more difficult than ever. And, at that point, the van, despite being the only physical evidence recovered, still offered no concrete clues about the driver's subsequent movements or what occurred around it before discovery. With the Quinnipiac camera analysis yielding no information about the van's driver and witness statements remaining scattered, investigators were forced to expand the search beyond campus, focusing on areas the suspect might have passed through before abandoning the Aerostar. Using the average travel radius from the parking spot and secondary roads connecting Quinnipiac to surrounding neighborhoods, police divided the broader area into concentric search circles and canvassed them in order of priority. It was during this expanded search that the investigation recorded its most significant find since the van itself. The first location was a small bar near Whitney Avenue, just a few blocks from campus. While opening up and cleaning the rear entrance area, an infrequently used spot, a staff member discovered a woman's wallet left beneath the back steps. Upon opening it, he saw identification and documents belonging to Elena Marquez and immediately contacted police. Officers responded, processed the scene, and noted that the wallet contained no cash and showed no tears or damage. It had simply been left quietly in a hard-to-see place. Police searched the surrounding area, but found no other items belonging to Elena or any signs of dragging, collision, or struggle. The fact that the wallet appeared in a location completely unrelated to any logical route Elena and Liam would have taken led investigators to conclude it had most likely been deliberately discarded by someone else rather than accidentally dropped. The second discovery came within roughly a 1-mile radius when a maintenance worker at a small Hamden park reported finding a single athletic shoe beside a walking path. He initially thought it was just lost property. But after news of the disappearance spread locally and photos of the missing pair were publicized, he realized the shoe matched the one Liam was believed to be wearing on the day he vanished. Police immediately secured the small area around the path to preserve evidence. The shoe showed no excessive mud or unusual wear, suggesting it had not been tossed during flight or a struggle, but rather placed or dropped intentionally. Searches of the path and nearby grass revealed neither the mate nor any related items, and there were no clear signs that Elena or Liam had ever walked there. The third and most decisive find occurred near an abandoned bus stop as the search extended along possible escape corridors from the Quinnipiac campus. There, an officer located a thin nylon bag blown against a brick wall. Inside was a folded paper road map marked with a highlighted route between West Hartford and New Haven, along with a car key and a white zip tie identical to the one found in the van. The key was confirmed to belong to the Porter family's Ford Aerostar. Compared to the previous two items, the nylon bag appeared more organized, as if someone had deliberately packaged the contents together in a lightweight bundle and left it in a spot unlikely to be noticed by a casual passerby. Police collected everything and documented the location with photos and diagrams. No clear physical or biological traces were present in the surrounding area, no fresh footprints, no unusual scuff marks on the ground, but the presence of the marked map drew particular attention. It raised the question of why items so directly tied to Elena and Liam's journey were being discarded in a seemingly scattered, illogical manner. After the three major items were recovered, all were sent to the forensics lab for examination. Elena's wallet was processed first. Both exterior and interior surfaces were scanned for fingerprints and biological material. While Elena's prints were clearly present, several contact areas also revealed prints from an unidentified individual, matching the Profile X recovered from the van. Liam's shoe yielded little biological evidence overall, but skin cells on the collar and laces belonged to an individual matching Profile X, confirming close physical contact. The nylon bag and map contained faint fingerprints, not clear enough for an independent profile, but sufficient to confirm a match with Profile X. The zip tie inside the bag produced DNA identical to the one found in the van, further solidifying the same unknown individual's presence across multiple items at separate locations. Each processed item was added to a master location board that now included the bar, the park area, and the abandoned bus stop. When plotted on a map, the three sites formed a gentle southeast curving arc, not entirely random, but resembling a deliberate travel sequence. Although the exact chronological order in which the suspect discarded the items could not be established, the geographic distribution suggested the individual was comfortable moving through residential areas and willing to appear in moderately trafficked places, yet consistently chose concealed spots behind the bar or beside the derelict bus stop to leave the evidence. Investigators compiled the data and concluded that, while a complete travel route remained unknown, the pattern represented a series of stops or discard points along a consistent path, indicating the suspect had intentionally scattered traces across multiple small locations, likely to confuse the search direction or reduce the chances of pinpointing the primary incident site. With all three items bearing DNA from the same unidentified person, Profile X evolved from a single trace in the van into a linking element across a wide area, and the pattern of the three discovery points became the strongest chain of clues the investigation had obtained since Elena and Liam disappeared from West Hartford. Once the three scattered locations where Elena and Liam's belongings were found were plotted alongside the abandoned Ford Aerostar, investigators began to recognize that the movement pattern left by the suspect was not impulsive or directionless. On the contrary, it appeared the suspect traveled routes he knew well, selecting discard sites with moderate foot traffic, yet sufficient privacy to drop items unnoticed. The distribution formed a gentle arc around the Hamden and North Haven areas, demonstrating a certain familiarity with the region. Not just the main roads, but also back streets and lesser-known shortcuts that outsiders would rarely know. Combining this with the van's abandonment on the Quinnipiac campus, investigators hypothesized that the suspect was likely a local resident or someone who worked within a small radius of the university, possessing routines or experience traveling between residential zones, side roads, and less traveled intersections unfamiliar to out-of-state visitors. Using the existing clues, including the zip ties, latex glove fragments, discard pattern, and vehicle abandonment location, the team began building behavioral criteria to screen potential suspects. They focused on occupations that required frequent personal vehicle use, regular entry into residential areas, or presence in suburban locations at varied hours. HVAC technicians, local delivery drivers, electricians, maintenance workers, appliance repair technicians, and similar short-range, high-coverage technical trades. The common thread was familiarity with the street layout of towns between Hartford and New Haven, especially knowledge of back routes, shortcuts, and secluded spots, factors that aligned perfectly with the evidence trail the suspect left behind. Working with the courts, investigators obtained lists of HVAC, delivery, and maintenance employees within a several-mile radius of Quinnipiac. They also requested employee records from local businesses, including anyone employed, full-time, part-time, or shift-based, in 2007. Once compiled, basic verification was conducted on travel times, work schedules, and residence history for everyone on the list. Detectives tried to establish whether any individual had a legitimate reason to be near the evidence locations during the days surrounding Elena and Liam's disappearance. Some individuals had been in the area for deliveries or repairs, but none matched even the vague witness descriptions or exhibited any direct link to the physical evidence. As the suspect pool narrowed, police requested voluntary DNA samples from those remaining in the high-risk group for comparison with Profile X. Collection followed proper legal protocol and required consent. Most cooperated willingly, eager to clear their names from a case that had gripped the community. A few requested legal counsel or time to consider, but ultimately every person on the narrowed list provided a sample. The DNA samples were sent to the lab and run against Profile X from the van and discarded items. When results returned, not a single sample from the potential suspects matched Profile X. The suspect list effectively dropped to zero, pushing the investigation back to a state of no direct leads. The fact that every individual from the occupation group that best fit the geographic and behavioral profile had been eliminated forced the team to reevaluate many initial assumptions. They considered the possibility that the suspect worked in a less common trade, operated outside formal employment records, or was employed informally by a small business the police had not yet reached. It was also impossible to rule out someone familiar with the area from earlier years, who, at the time of the 2007 disappearance, was not working in a technical field and therefore fell outside the screening pool. No clear data pointed to a new direction, however. For the first time since the van was located, steps that had appeared to be major progress yielded no specific individual. Although Profile X appeared on multiple items across different sites, No one from the pool of people who regularly accessed the area shared that genetic marker. This prompted a series of new questions without immediate answers. Could the suspect be from outside the region yet possess detailed local knowledge? Was this someone with complex travel habits who knew how to avoid security cameras? Or was the analyzed discard pattern entirely intentional misdirection? Whatever the correct explanation, the reality at that moment remained unchanged. No one on the potential suspect list matched Profile X, and the case, despite substantial physical evidence, had not advanced any further in identifying the person who left DNA on the Ford Aerostar and the associated items, leaving the effort to narrow suspects in a state of clear stagnation. After the list of potential suspects based on occupation and area was completely eliminated because no one matched Profile X, the investigation team realized they were gradually running out of direct leads. Physical evidence was abundant, but could not be tied to any specific individual, and although the suspect's movement pattern was clear, it revealed neither a definite starting point nor end point. To gain additional behavioral expertise, the Connecticut police decided to contact the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, BO, for assistance in sketching a suspect profile based on the collected evidence and recorded movement sequence. In the first working session, the BO examined each piece of evidence in relation to its discovery location, the distances between sites, and the likely sequence in which the suspect discarded them. Behavioral experts paid special attention to the zip ties and latex gloves recovered from the van, as well as the zip tie found inside the nylon bag at the abandoned bus stop. These items were not ordinary everyday objects carried by chance. They were tools used to quickly and cleanly restrain victims without leaving many physical traces on surrounding surfaces. The BO concluded that the repeated presence of such items at multiple locations indicated the suspect likely used them deliberately rather than impulsively. This suggested a degree of preparation or at least familiarity with restraining others, though it was not sufficient to conclude the suspect had a prior criminal record or previous offending experience. When analyzing the pattern of discarding items, the BO created a composite map of movement based on the locations of Elena's wallet, Liam's shoe, and the nylon bag containing keys, a map, and a zip tie. The distances between points were uneven, but all lay along a southeast trending band around Hamden and North Haven, consistent with the movement of someone familiar with the area who avoided busy roads and surveillance cameras. According to the BO, the suspect not only knew the main roads but was intimately familiar with side streets, turns, and concealed areas. This pointed to the strong likelihood that the suspect had lived, worked, or regularly traveled in the region for a significant period, rather than being a passing stranger. The non-random dispersal of items was also analyzed by the BAU. They determined that the suspect did not discard everything in one place, but spread the items across multiple locations far enough apart to appear random, yet still within the same controlled zone. This revealed a mindset aimed at confusing the search, or at least intentionally making investigators believe the victims had traveled through many different areas. The BAU viewed this as a sign of a calculating suspect who did not act in an emotionally uncontrolled state, but instead maintained a certain level of self-control throughout the movement process. When examining the type of evidence and the level of access required to leave traces inside the van, the BAU also noted that Profile X appeared on multiple items in different locations, meaning this individual had direct contact with the vehicle's interior and spent at least some time inside it. This indicated the suspect likely drove or controlled the Ford Aerostar on the night Elena and Liam disappeared. The BAU found no signs suggesting multiple perpetrators. They leaned toward the probability that this was the work of a single individual who maintained control from beginning to end. When synthesizing all the analyses, the BAU provided a preliminary behavioral profile of the suspect, a person likely familiar with the Hamden, North Haven, Cheshire area, who regularly traveled lesser roads, possessed skills or knowledge related to restraining victims using simple tools like zip ties, had a background or experience in technical repair or delivery jobs, occupations requiring wide but geographically familiar travel, and most notably, was adaptable, able to control the pace of movement, and left no clear traces at any location beyond the intentionally discarded evidence. However, the BAU emphasized that the suspect most likely fell outside the initial screening list. This could be for two reasons. Either the suspect was no longer working in technical fields at the time of the investigation, or he had worked in such a field before 2007, but later changed jobs, meaning his record was not in the current databases being checked. For this reason, the BAU recommended that police expand the suspect pool to include individuals who may have had access to technical occupations in the past, but were never deeply screened, encompassing seasonal workers, those who had left the profession, or individuals without clear employment records at the present time. According to the BAU, this group was likely to exhibit characteristics matching the suspect's behavior, yet had escaped the initial screening, making them the next critical focus of the investigation. Although the FBI BAU's behavioral analysis provided deeper insight into the suspect's possible movement and characteristics, it ultimately did not lead to any specific individual, leaving the investigation without clear anchors to further expand screening. From 2008 onward, the disappearance of Elena and Liam entered a phase where every existing clue had been exhausted but could not be developed into evidence identifying the suspect or the victim's movements after leaving West Hartford. All locations that once held evidence had been thoroughly searched. The area around Quinnipiac University had been swept multiple times with ever-widening radii, yet no new traces belonging to the two young people were found. Most crucially, no one reported seeing them in any town after they lost contact. There were no witnesses who encountered them at stores, gas stations, or transit points, and no data showed they had left the state. This silence made the investigation increasingly heavy because without any new biological traces or additional physical evidence, locating bodies became nearly impossible across Connecticut's vast forested areas. Meanwhile, the DNA Profile X remained the most important piece yet, could not be linked to anyone in the national system. Periodic CODIS updates consistently returned the same result. No individual arrested or sampled during this period matched Profile X. The existence of a DNA profile on key evidence that remained completely unknown in the criminal database led investigators to suspect the perpetrator might not belong to the population of previously documented offenders or might have no connection to any previously reported cases. This meant relying solely on DNA would not be enough to find him at that time. Between 2009 and 2012, police conducted several periodic re-examinations of all collected evidence in hopes that incremental forensic improvements, though still minor compared to the future, might produce a breakthrough. However, analytical technologies of that era remained limited. Items such as zip ties, latex gloves, and vehicle interior surfaces had already been processed multiple times without yielding new results. Technicians confirmed that no inanalyzed biological samples remained, and that every possibility for extracting additional DNA had been maximized. Large forested areas previously searched were sporadically rechecked when resources allowed, but the vast terrain and lack of specific suspicious locations rendered these efforts ineffective. Although a few volunteer search teams continued to assist during dry seasons, combing steep ravines or rarely used trails, no new items surfaced to suggest Elena and Liam's final movements. In 2013, police attempted a new screening branch by analyzing reports of suspicious individuals moving around Hamden and North Haven during 2007-2008. But the large volume of reports and high overlap in descriptions yielded no definitive results. No description matched any details from the recovered evidence. As time passed, the case became increasingly shrouded in uncertainty. In the official records of the Connecticut State Police, the disappearance of Elena Marquez and Liam Porter was classified as one of the most complex cases due to its no-foothold nature, no bodies, no incident location, no direct witnesses, and no new leads for many consecutive years. By 2014, After every practical investigative avenue had been exhausted to the maximum without a single new trace, the case file was transferred from active investigation to the Connecticut State Police Cold Case Unit. This decision accurately reflected the investigation status. There was no evidence to move forward, yet the file could not be closed because the existing evidence, especially Profile X, kept open the possibility of resolution if a new factor ever emerged. During 2014 and 2015, the Cold Case Unit continued periodic file reviews, re-examining old reports, and re-interviewing some witnesses who had provided vague statements to see whether memory had sharpened or clarified over time. However, every re-interview confirmed the original situation. No one clearly saw the suspect, no one knew when the van appeared, and no one had new evidence. The case gradually sank into a deadlock that investigators, no matter how hard they tried, could not break using traditional methods and the resources available at that time. From 2016 onward, as significant advances in forensic science began to be widely adopted across many states, Connecticut's Cold Case Unit started re-evaluating long-pending cases, including the disappearance of Elena Marquez and Liam Porter. One of the cases they had never been able to fully close yet, had lacked an active investigative direction for years. This period marked the rapid rise of two new techniques, snapshot phenotyping and genetic genealogy, both of which quickly proved capable of producing breakthroughs in seemingly unsolvable old cases. With snapshot phenotyping, advanced laboratories could use unidentified DNA samples to generate composite images based on genetic traits: skin, pigmentation, eye color, facial structure, hair thickness, and many other physical characteristics. Although it could not produce a perfectly accurate portrait of the suspect, the technique opened the possibility of narrowing the search based on ethnicity, sex, and genetic morphological markers that traditional DNA data could not reveal. 2 years later, in 2018, the solving of the Golden State Killer case using genetic genealogy captured nationwide attention among investigators. Analysts had used data from the consumer DNA testing site GEDmatch to trace distant relatives of the suspect and identify him after decades, proving that DNA not matching CODIS did not mean absolute deadlock. Genetic genealogy became a game-changing tool, especially for cold cases where the perpetrator had never left a trace in official criminal systems. The breakthroughs of these two technologies prompted Connecticut's Cold Case Unit to conduct a systematic review, reassessing cases containing unidentified DNA samples. On that list, Profile X from the Elena and Liam case was quickly flagged as one of the highest potential samples for reanalysis, because its consistent appearance across multiple items at different locations made it the only key capable of unlocking the true nature of the 2007 disappearance. By mid-2019, once internal procedures allowed the Cold Case Unit to reactivate cases with unidentified DNA, the team began re-examining all evidence in the file: zip ties, latex gloves, items inside the van, the map, wallet, and the single shoe found at the park. Although all these items had been processed years earlier, newer technology could provide deeper analysis of skin cell types, DNA fragmentation levels, and the ability to separate mixed DNA, techniques unavailable in 2007 or the immediate years after. Forensic technicians also re-evaluated initial collection procedures to determine whether any residual genetic material could still be recovered from the items. Some new technologies, such as charged micro-contact separation and high-sensitivity DNA amplification, opened the possibility of extracting data even from samples previously deemed insufficient. While reviewing the file, the Cold Case Unit noticed a standout detail: Profile X appeared not only inside the van, but also on Elena's wallet, Liam's shoelace, the zip tie at the bus stop, and the map found in the nylon bag. The same profile appearing in multiple locations proved that the person who left this DNA played a central role in the chain of events the night the two young people vanished. The file became a perfect fit for both snapshot phenotyping and subsequent genetic genealogy analysis. In addition to DNA evaluation, the cold case unit re-examined all original scene notes, photographs, and evidence diagrams to ensure no detail had been overlooked when forensic methods were still limited. The team spent considerable time reviewing how the van was collected, transported, and processed, as well as the environmental conditions at the time each item was discovered. These factors mattered because newer technology is more sensitive to DNA degradation, allowing analysts to estimate exposure levels or the time items were discarded. By late 2020, after a comprehensive assessment, the cold case unit officially concluded that the disappearance of Elena and Liam qualified for reactivation as an active investigation based on two pillars: the repeated and stable presence of Profile X across multiple items of evidence and the powerful development of modern forensic technology, particularly snapshot phenotyping and genetic genealogy. With the decision to re-examine all evidence using modern techniques, the cold case unit hoped that the limitations that had deadlocked the case for over a decade could finally be broken, because the tools now available were far more powerful than those in the years immediately following 2007, when the case was fresh and everything was shrouded in uncertainty. In early 2021, as the Connecticut State Police Cold Case Review Program entered a phase focused on cases with high breakthrough potential through new forensic technology, the disappearance file of Elena Marquez and Liam Porter was moved into the priority group due to the consistent presence of Profile X and the strong linkage between evidence recovered from multiple locations. Detective Harper Quinn, a seasoned investigator experienced in complex cases and many projects involving next-generation DNA, was assigned to take over and fully re-evaluate the file. Upon accessing the materials, he began by meticulously reviewing every piece of evidence, from the fiber fragments in the van to the zip ties, latex gloves, wallet, single shoe, and the map found at the abandoned bus stop. Harper paid particular attention to the geographic distribution of the evidence, re-examining how the items formed an arc around Hamden and North Haven that ended where the van was abandoned. Using modern digital mapping and updated terrain data, he reconstructed possible movement routes based on estimated timelines, combined with knowledge of the area's 2007 traffic structure. From this, he saw that the suspect had not followed any common thoroughfares. Instead, the pattern suggested an approach by someone intimately familiar with back roads, knowing how to avoid surveillance cameras, and using concealed spaces to discard evidence without drawing attention. The map Harper created with geometric analysis software showed that connecting the discard points in a time-independent sequence revealed a relatively narrow movement corridor, suggesting an area where the suspect might have felt familiar or comfortable operating. Previous investigators had noticed this, but lacked tools for deeper analysis, leading Harper to believe the pattern was not mere random scattering, but could reflect the suspect's habits or natural activity zone. After reanalyzing the movement pattern, Harper re-examined the Ford Aerostar, the case's central piece of evidence, through original photographs, forensic notes, and transport reports. He focused especially on the locations of faint touch marks on door handles, the rear door, and seat belts where Profile X appeared in high concentration. Drawing on experience with cases involving vehicle movement after victims disappeared, Harper observed that the DNA distribution inside the van did not match what a stranger would leave through random contact. Instead, this profile appeared in places typically touched only by someone driving or regularly using the vehicle for an extended time. This reinforced the conclusion that the suspect most likely drove the van at least part of the way after Elena and Liam vanished, yet left no traces large or obvious enough for police to detect during initial processing. The careful re-examination of old forensic results made Harper realize that Profile X was not just an isolated marker, but a repeated signature following a clear system, even though distributed across different items. By compiling all data into a new consolidated table and applying geographic clustering algorithms, Harper determined that Profile X likely represented one individual who contacted the evidence in multiple contexts, yet within the same geographic range. After completing the review of evidence and discard patterns, Harper concluded that the next step had to focus on analyzing Profile X with technology far more advanced than what was used in 2007 and 2008. This included snapshot phenotyping, a technology he believed could narrow the suspect pool from the entire region down to a manageable size. Because Connecticut State Police facilities and equipment were not yet sufficient to perform phenotyping at the required level of detail, Harper immediately prepared documentation to send the unidentified DNA sample to Parabon Nanolabs, one of the nation's leading labs in snapshot phenotyping combined with genetic genealogy. Harper also double-checked legal standards for sending DNA samples out of state, ensuring all necessary authorizations and permits were in order. He gathered all forensic reports related to Profile X, including the chain of items containing the DNA, sample integrity, degradation status, and feasibility for current techniques. Based on these assessments, Harper drafted a report emphasizing that Profile X was the only trace strong enough to shift the case from prolonged deadlock to one that could be restarted with a new investigative direction. The DNA sample was packaged in a standard biocontainer with full accompanying reports and sent to Parabon Nanolabs with requests to perform snapshot phenotyping, analyze genetically determined physical characteristics, identify ancestral marker groups, and generate the dataset needed to narrow the suspect pool. When the file was transferred, Harper marked the Elena and Liam case as active on the cold case unit's roster, ending more than a decade of complete standstill and opening for the first time in many years the possibility that the evidence could finally be viewed from an entirely new perspective thanks to the advancement of forensic technology in the modern era. When the unidentified DNA sample labeled Profile X arrived at Parabon Nanolabs, the snapshot phenotyping analysis began with isolating the genetic markers related to physical appearance from the still intact DNA sequence. Parabon experts used algorithms based on reference data from hundreds of thousands of individuals to predict the traits of this person, including eye color, hair color, skin tone, facial shape, body build, lean to heavy, and several other genetic markers that could influence overall appearance. After weeks of data processing, Parabon provided the cold case unit with a detailed composite in the form of 3 predicted images at 3 different ages, approximately 25 years old, approximately 40 years old, and 1 simulation at an older age for long-term comparison. These images were not perfectly accurate representations of the real face, but they captured the key genetic traits. The suspect was highly likely to be a white male with medium brown or dark brown hair, blue or light blue eyes, relatively prominent cheekbone structure, and facial proportions common in the northeastern U.S. states. Parabon also provided ancestry percentages showing the suspect had more than 95% Northwestern European ancestry, which fit perfectly with the demographic profile of Connecticut, especially the Cheshire, Hampden, and North Haven areas. Upon receiving the composite package, Detective Harper Quinn entered all this information into the old case database to cross-reference it against suspect files reviewed during the initial investigation phase, including lists of HVAC workers, delivery drivers, technicians, and residents living near Quinnipiac in 2007. Harper manually reviewed every record that had already been screened, comparing photographs, physical descriptions, and personal details to the Parabon composite for Profile X. However, none of the individuals previously on the screening lists or interviewed by police possessed the combination of traits that matched the Profile X simulation. Some matched race and hair color but differed clearly in facial structure or eye color, others looked closer in appearance but did not match the predicted age range at the time of the crime. Harper expanded the comparison to prior police records involving suspicious behavior around Hampden, North Haven in 2007, but again, no individual was a significant match. Over the years, the case had stalled. Hundreds of people had been considered through broad sweeps, but not one of them had a DNA profile available for comparison with Profile X. Based on the phenotype data, Harper realized that if the suspect had ever been noticed during the early phase of the case, his photograph would almost certainly have appeared in those previous screenings, yet it never did. Even archived photos of individuals checked right after the incident, people who were unrelated but interviewed because they were near the evidence recovery sites, contained no one whose appearance matched the snapshot composite. Upon deeper analysis, Harper saw something even more important than the consistency between the composite and behavioral traits. The simulated image suggested a man capable of operating under pressure and acting in a calculated pattern, which aligned with the item dumping pattern the team had previously analyzed. Yet the key point was that no individual with similar genetic traits had ever appeared on any prior screening list. This led Harper to conclude that the suspect had never been on the investigative radar when the crime was fresh and may never have drawn police attention in connection with that area in 2007. This information became a major turning point in direction because it eliminated the possibility that the suspect was one of the people interviewed early or included in the previously screened occupational files. The combination of snapshot data and behavioral data indicated this was most likely an individual who lived or worked in the area, but left no trace in traditional investigative systems. Harper noted that the fact the suspect had never appeared on any old list rendered traditional occupational or residency screening methods useless going forward. All he had was a genetic appearance composite of a man who had never been noticed in the initial investigative circle, a person identified only through biological trace evidence, not through administrative or demographic database queries, forcing him to find a completely new approach to continue tracking Profile X. After using snapshot phenotyping and concluding that the suspect had never appeared on any traditional investigative list, Detective Harper Quinn realized there was only one viable path left to identify Profile X: genetic genealogy. This method had already proven groundbreaking in several prior cold cases, especially when the suspect had no record in CODIS and left no administrative or criminal history trail. Because Profile X had sufficient DNA integrity for distant relative analysis, Harper prepared the sample and uploaded it to GED Match, an open database where the public voluntarily uploads genetic profiles to search for relatives, reconstruct family trees, or expand ancestry information. Uploading to GED Match was not intended to find the suspect directly, since the database contains no criminal DNA data, but to locate any distant relatives who shared DNA segments with Profile X, thereby building a family tree and working inward to the actual perpetrator. Once the Profile X data was processed and uploaded, the GED Match system began comparing it against millions of other profiles in the database. The results showed two individuals with strong enough genetic matches to Profile X to be considered distant cousins at the second cousin or third cousin level. Both people were unrelated to the crime and did not live in Connecticut. They were simply consumers who had taken commercial DNA tests and allowed their data to be shared on GED Match. Yet these two individuals became the most critical anchor points in the entire file because each represented a separate genealogical branch from which analysts could begin tracing. Harper contacted a genetic genealogist recommended by GED Match who had experience building family trees in complex cold cases. By researching family origins, birth years, and residences of each distant relative, the genealogist began constructing two parallel family trees using publicly available records such as birth certificates, marriage records, obituaries, census data, and other open archival documents. The first tree started from the first distant relative and traced back to a European origin family that had settled for generations in New England, branching out through multiple paternal and maternal lines. The second tree had a similar structure, but belonged to a different lineage whose ancestors had moved from Vermont to Massachusetts and then into Connecticut. When both family trees were nearly complete, the genealogist cross-referenced them to identify any overlapping branches, points where Profile X could connect based on DNA compatibility. After weeks of review, analysis, and elimination of branches that did not fit timelines, ages, or residency areas, the genealogist found a clear convergence point: the Talbert family line, a multi-generational family living in the Cheshire and North Haven areas, not far from the locations where evidence had been recovered. The Talbert branch appeared in both trees as the unifying link between the two distant cousins, indicating that Profile X had to belong to someone within this lineage or directly related to it. This was a critical breakthrough because it narrowed the search from thousands of individuals with similar ancestry markers down to one family group whose geographic location matched the suspect's movement pattern. Harper continued working with the genealogist to narrow the list further. By aligning timelines, the genealogist determined the generation most likely to include Profile X consisted of individuals born from the early 1980s to the mid-1990s, matching the age range the suspect would have been in 2007, according to the snapshot phenotyping. When screening Talbert branch individuals within that age range, the genealogist identified 3 men who fit the birth timeline, DNA compatibility level, and predicted genetic traits. All 3 had ancestry matching the 2 distant cousins found on GED Match and either lived or had lived in the Cheshire, North Haven, Hampden area, consistent with the geographic evidence pattern. Harper received the list of 3 names from the genealogist and began checking basic information for each residences in 2007, occupations, connections to the Quinnipiac area, and likelihood of traveling through the evidence drop locations. At this stage, the information was still preliminary because none of the 3 had ever drawn local police attention the year of the disappearance. All 3 had no significant criminal history and no DNA profiles in CODIS, which explained why Profile X had never matched anything in the national system. The most important thing Harper noted was that throughout the nearly 14-year investigation, no one with the last name Talbert had ever been placed on a suspect list, interviewed, or even flagged in any report related to Elena and Liam's disappearance. This fit perfectly with the forensic and behavioral data. The perpetrator was someone completely outside the original investigative scope. With 3 names in hand and a complete family tree establishing the relationship between Profile X and the Talbert line, Harper knew the pool had narrowed enough to directly compare each individual's geographic and occupational data to determine who left DNA on the Ford Aerostar and other evidence items. Those 3 individuals became the next focal point in a case that for over a decade had no specific suspect at all. After the family tree was fully built and the suspect pool narrowed to 3 Talbert men, Detective Harper Quinn moved to the critical analysis step, comparing each man's 2007 residence and employment data to determine who could have been present in the areas tied to the disappearance. This required combining administrative records, employment files, old addresses, and common travel routes during the period of the crime. Harper started by gathering registered 2007 addresses for the 3 men through land records and tax databases. The first man on the list, though a Talbert and in the correct age range, lived in northern Massachusetts when Elena and Liam vanished. Traffic records, vehicle registration, and employment documents showed he did not work in Connecticut before 2010 and had no connection to the Hampden, North Haven, or Quinnipiac areas. This branch was quickly removed from primary focus because it did not fit the established geographic pattern. The second man, according to population records, lived in West Hartford in 2007 but worked full-time at a factory in Springfield, Massachusetts. Although his residence placed him close enough to Elena and Liam's travel route, his fixed work hours and company location made it virtually impossible for him to be in the Hampden area during the crime window. Additionally, his occupation had nothing to do with technical, delivery, or maintenance jobs, the occupational groups the BAU had flagged as high probability for the perpetrator's profile. Company-provided traffic data, obtained through legal request, confirmed he was clocked in at work at the exact time Elena and Liam left home, eliminating any possibility of involvement afterward. With 2 of the 3 men eliminated based on residence and employment data, the remaining name, Ryan Talbert, became the natural focus of the entire analysis. Harper gathered every available piece of information on Ryan in 2007: residence, job, travel history, connections to the Quinnipiac area, and routes to the evidence drop locations. Land records showed Ryan lived in a small house in Cheshire, less than 7 miles from where the van was abandoned. That was a short distance, perfectly consistent with the perpetrator's behavioral pattern, someone who moved within a tight familiar radius and did not stray far from home territory. Ryan's house sat almost directly between two evidence recovery sites and was only minutes by car from a side road leading into Hampden. This immediately caught Harper's attention because the evidence dumping pattern had revealed the perpetrator moved in an arc through Hampden, North Haven, Cheshire, and Ryan's residence fell almost exactly within that space. When Harper examined Ryan's 2007 employment records, he discovered Ryan had worked as a delivery driver for a local HVAC company. The job required him to travel regularly between residential neighborhoods, commercial zones, and small buildings throughout the region, including Hampden and North Haven, areas that matched where Elena and Liam's evidence items later appeared. This was especially significant because when the crime was fresh, police had reviewed HVAC employee lists but never found Ryan. His old employment records were no longer kept by the company after internal changes. That explained why Ryan had never been investigated or interviewed in the early phase despite his occupation fitting the behavioral profile perfectly. Digging further into administrative files, Harper found old paperwork showing Ryan had lost a short-term delivery job in the fall of 2007. Although the stated reason had nothing to do with criminal behavior, it placed Ryan in the right time, right area, and right circumstances to move through the evidence drop locations unnoticed. When Harper compared delivery routes provided from the company's archived records, he saw that many of Ryan's secondary routes overlapped with trails the perpetrator likely used to discard items, information no prior investigative team had accessed because the employment files were purged when the company changed ownership in 2010. Using mapping data and behavioral analysis, Harper determined Ryan was the only one of the three who possessed the complete combination of residence location, occupational experience, and movement capability that matched the perpetrator's pattern. None of this proved he was Profile X, but it placed him in the highest probability, soul matching category across the full forensic behavioral, geographic analysis. The strong overlap between Ryan's residence and the van abandonment site was one of the most compelling factors. That location was not only within a reasonable travel radius, but lay along routes Ryan had driven repeatedly for work, making his presence there, in 2007, entirely plausible. When all the data was compiled, Harper concluded that of the 3 Talbert men narrowed from GED match, only Ryan Talbert met every geographic, occupational, and behavioral criterion. With that level of alignment, Ryan became the first and only primary suspect in the case since Profile X had been discovered. When the cross-referencing of residency and occupational data proved that only Ryan Talbert matched the full criteria for geography, occupation, and behavior, Detective Harper Quinn realized that the next step had to be executed with absolute caution. Although Ryan was the sole primary suspect, everything up to that point had been circumstantial, based on indirect forensics and genetic genealogy. What was needed to confirm the suspicion was a direct DNA comparison sample against Profile X. Therefore, Harper planned to secretly surveil Ryan in order to collect a DNA sample from an item he inadvertently discarded in the environment, a legally accepted method when a suspect does not voluntarily provide a sample. The surveillance began by tracking Ryan's daily routine. Harper and a small team observed from a distance to determine when Ryan left home, the routes he regularly took, and the locations he visited. This had to be done discreetly to avoid alerting the suspect or triggering any wariness that could cause him to alter his habits or change how he interacted with his surroundings. After several days of observation, the surveillance team noted that Ryan had a habit of stopping at a chain coffee shop near his workplace. He usually bought coffee to go before starting his shift, sometimes sitting in his car for a while, before tossing the paper cup into a trash can next to the parking lot. This presented an opportunity to collect DNA directly from the surface of the paper cup. However, the law required that the sample be obtained under circumstances where the suspect no longer had control over the item, meaning the object had to be fully discarded and not located in a protected area, such as a private residence or personal trash. To ensure legal conditions were met, the surveillance team waited until Ryan left the shop and threw the cup into a public trash can outside the store. Harper directed one team member to approach the trash can immediately after Ryan departed and retrieve the cup without disturbing other items. The cup was immediately placed into an evidence bag, sealed according to protocol, and time-stamped for transport to the forensics lab. Meanwhile, the surveillance team continued monitoring Ryan throughout the day to ensure he exhibited no dangerous behavior or signs that he had detected the tail. Over the next 2 days, to increase certainty, Harper decided to collect a second piece of evidence, a beverage can that Ryan left on a supermarket parking lot near his home. The can had been freely abandoned in a public area and was not within the suspect's personal space, making it fully valid for collection under investigative procedure. The can was processed the same way, tagged as evidence, and sent to the forensics lab. Once the items were delivered to the DNA analysis lab, technicians began the process of extracting DNA from the rim of the paper cup and the can. Thanks to the relatively good quality of the samples and sufficient skin cell DNA adhering to them, the analysis proceeded smoothly. First, the technicians determined that the sample from the coffee cup contained DNA from a single male with no mixture from others. They then compared this sample to Profile X, which had been analyzed multiple times and was stored in the case database. The result was conclusive. The DNA from the coffee cup matched Profile X perfectly, the same profile previously found in the Ford Aerostar, on Liam's shoelace, on Elena's wallet, on the zip tie, and on multiple other items of evidence. This scientifically proved that Ryan Talbert was the individual who left DNA at all the locations connected to Elena and Liam's 2007 disappearance. To further reinforce the findings, the lab continued analyzing the DNA sample obtained from the beverage can. The second sample also produced an exact match to Profile X, eliminating any possibility of error or contamination during collection. 2 independent samples, collected at different times from different objects, both carried the identical genetic code to the DNA found on the case evidence. These results elevated Harper's suspicion to evidence strong enough to move the case into the next legal phase. Harper prepared the official report, compiling all the data, the evidence dumping pattern, the van's location, demographic analysis, phenotyping snapshot, genetic genealogy, and finally, the confirmatory DNA comparison that identified the suspect. The complete file was submitted to the court to obtain an arrest warrant for Ryan Talbert on probable cause that he was directly involved in the disappearances of Elena Marquez and Liam Porter. With absolute DNA matches combined with tightly correlated occupational and geographic data, Harper knew the warrant request rested on solid legal ground, marking the point, after nearly 14 years, that the case finally had a definitive suspect to bring before the justice system. When the DNA analysis fully confirmed that Ryan Talbert was the person who left Profile X on a series of items directly tied to the 2007 disappearance, Detective Harper Quinn submitted the entire case file to the court and quickly obtained an arrest warrant. A case that had been silent for over a decade suddenly shifted into high gear as law enforcement prepared to take Ryan into custody without giving him any chance to flee or destroy potential additional evidence. On a late 2021 morning, as Ryan left home for work, following his usual routine, a Connecticut State Police task force, coordinated with tactical support, quietly moved in. They waited until he entered a nearly empty parking area behind his residence and executed the arrest in a matter of seconds, with no confrontation. Ryan was stunned, confused, and had no idea what was happening, but he did not resist as he was handcuffed and placed in a police vehicle. The arresting team briefly informed him that he was being taken into custody on a court warrant related to a serious case that could not yet be disclosed. Once Ryan was brought to the station, Harper prepared the interrogation room and reviewed all the organized materials divided into sections: forensics, behavior, geography, and genealogy. Harper's goal was not merely to hear denials, but to methodically present evidence that would leave Ryan no room to evade, forcing him to confront the reality the proof revealed. When the interrogation began, Ryan remained guarded, giving short answers and repeatedly stating he had no idea why he was arrested. Harper started with basic questions about his life in 2007, where he worked, the areas he regularly drove through, and the neighborhoods he lived in at that time. Ryan answered cautiously, trying to stay calm, but unable to hide his discomfort when Harper mentioned locations like Hamden, North Haven, or Cheshire, areas that matched the suspect's movement pattern. When Harper brought up the abandoned Ford Aerostar and the items found scattered in the area, Ryan continued to deny any connection, claiming he didn't remember or that police must have the wrong guy. The interrogation proceeded in this defensive mode until Harper introduced the first piece of forensic evidence: DNA extracted from the coffee cup Ryan had discarded. Harper clearly stated that this DNA matched exactly the DNA recovered from the van seatbelt, Elena's wallet, the zip tie, and the map, all evidence tied to the 2007 disappearance. Ryan fell silent for several seconds, but then resumed denying, suggesting the sample might have been mixed up or that someone was trying to frame him. Harper, staying calm, placed a second piece of evidence in front of him, the DNA report from the beverage can Ryan discarded at the supermarket parking lot. The report stated a complete match to Profile X on every marker. Faced with two clear independent samples, Ryan began showing signs of stress. He looked down at the table, his responses became fragmented, and he lost the confident tone he had at the start. Harper continued the step-by-step investigative approach, moving to logical geographic timelines from the night Elena and Liam vanished. He presented the evidence-dumping pattern diagram, explaining that only someone intimately familiar with the Cheshire-Hamden, North Haven triangle could have moved along that closed loop without hitting surveillance cameras or high-traffic areas. Harper asked Ryan to explain why the entire pattern aligned perfectly with the areas where he had lived and worked. Ryan did not answer. Harper then laid out Ryan's 2007 employment history, showing that he had worked as an HVAC delivery driver at the exact time Elena and Liam disappeared, a job the BAU had identified as the highest probability occupation for controlling victims, using secondary roads, and knowing remote wooded areas. When Harper asked whether Ryan would deny ever driving through the Mount Carmel area, Ryan appeared flustered, further reinforcing the investigators' suspicion. After more than an hour, Ryan shifted from strong denials to prolonged silence. This was the clear sign Harper had been waiting for, the initial psychological collapse when a suspect realizes the forensic data is undeniable, and further denial will only worsen the situation. When Harper asked directly, "Do you want to explain the truth before we find it ourselves?" Ryan sat up straight but avoided eye contact, took a deep breath, and sighed. He no longer maintained his initial composure. After a long pause, Ryan asked for a glass of water, and when he returned to the table, his voice had completely changed, no longer defiant but weary, as if he accepted that evasion was no longer possible. Finally, Ryan spoke, admitting that he knew what Harper wanted to ask, and that he couldn't take it anymore. Harper did not push. He let Ryan continue on his own. Then, in a weak voice, Ryan confessed that the bodies of Elena and Liam were hidden in a deep wooded area of Mount Carmel. Harper asked for a more specific description of the location, but Ryan only said it was a place he had known since childhood, deep in a section of forest with no main trails and very little foot traffic. This admission, even though short on precise details, was the biggest breakthrough since the investigation began in 2007. With this statement, Harper immediately paused the interrogation to comply with legal procedure and prepare for the next phase of verifying and locating the site Ryan had referenced. Immediately after Ryan Talbert confessed that the bodies of Elena Marquez and Liam Porter were hidden in a deep wooded area of Mount Carmel Detective Harper Quinn reported to his command and requested deployment of a special search team combined with forensics personnel. The task force immediately sealed off the forest area based on Ryan's initial description, using GPS units to mark search points and expanding the radius in concentric arcs to ensure no potential locations were missed. Mount Carmel is rugged terrain with steep slopes, dense canopy, and many soft soil areas, making the search slower and more labor-intensive than anticipated. A K-9 unit trained to detect human remains was brought to the scene, along with forensic specialists equipped with metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and hand-digging tools to avoid disturbing soil structure. Based on Ryan's vague initial description, the searchers divided the area into grids and moved in parallel lines. After several hours of sweeping, one of the cadaver dogs alerted and stopped at a natural depression behind a thick stand of trees, where the ground showed a color change in the soil compared to the surroundings, suggesting prior digging. When forensic technicians examined the spot more closely, they discovered an unnaturally compacted layer of soil and leaf litter that had decomposed in a way inconsistent with the natural environment. This was the first strong indication that Ryan's statement had a factual basis. The forensic team began excavating by hand to preserve evidence. After removing just a few top layers of soil, they uncovered dark fabric, followed by a portion of bone exposed under excavation lights. The dig expanded eastward from the burial pit, where the search team located a second set of remains buried not far from the first. Both bodies had been covered only superficially with thin layers of soil, indicating the person who buried them had spent little time or lacked proper digging equipment. Upon completion of the excavation, the forensic team preserved each skeletal element and transported them to the lab under standard protocol. Evidence recovered around the burial site included deteriorated nylon rope, dark fabric scraps, and an intact zip tie, identical to the type previously found in the van, and plastic bags. In the forensic lab, specialists analyzed bone structure and compared DNA from marrow and teeth with samples from Elena's and Liam's relatives. The results were conclusive. The two sets of remains were indeed Elena Marquez and Liam Porter, ending 14 years of uncertainty about whether they were still alive or missing elsewhere. Recovering the bodies opened the door to reconstructing the crime. Based on decomposition levels, body positions, and accompanying evidence, the forensic team concluded that Elena and Liam had been killed shortly after losing contact. Certain marks on the bones indicated blunt force trauma, while the zip ties found beside the remains supported the theory that the suspect had used them to restrain both victims. The decayed fabric and binding material were identified as likely having been used for gagging or tying, consistent with the evidence pattern investigators had traced along the route years earlier. The proximity of the two bodies indicated they were buried at the same time, reinforcing the assumption that Elena and Liam were killed in a single continuous event rather than separate incidents. The burial location also fit the suspect's behavioral profile. Secluded, no trails, nearly impossible to stumble upon without intimate knowledge of the terrain. Everything aligned perfectly with the behavioral analysis constructed the previous year and further confirmed the suspect's deep geographic familiarity with the Mount Carmel area. The excavation of the bodies and accompanying evidence solidified the entire chain of events investigators had suspected for years. The suspect approached Elena and Liam while they were traveling, subdued them with zip ties or similar restraints, drove the Ford Aerostar to the Quinnipiac area to mislead searchers, then transported the bodies to a remote section of forest and buried them shallowly before discarding items along a pattern designed to confuse the investigation. With the victims' bodies recovered, the missing persons case officially became a homicide investigation, opening a new legal phase built on forensic evidence, the suspect's confession, and autopsy findings. After the bodies of Elena Marquez and Liam Porter were positively identified and the entire forensic evidence chain was solidified, Ryan Talbert was formally charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and destruction of evidence, marking the transition of the 15-year missing persons case into the trial phase at the New Haven District Court. During the preliminary hearing, The prosecution presented a massive case file that included the suspect's movement patterns, the location where the Ford Aerostar was abandoned, physical evidence scattered across 3 separate sites, and comprehensive DNA analysis linking Ryan to every critical point in the case. A key part of the proceedings was explaining to the court how genetic genealogy was used as an investigative tool, not as direct prosecutorial evidence, but as a method that identified an investigative direction, ultimately leading to the collection of a direct DNA sample from items Ryan had discarded. Experts from Parabon Nanolabs were called as expert witnesses and explained how snapshot phenotyping and genetic genealogy through GED match narrowed an unknown DNA profile down from millions of possibilities to a specific family, and then to 3 men in the Talbert family. The prosecution emphasized that although genetic genealogy was not used as convicting evidence, it had enabled police to locate the suspect so they could obtain a traditional DNA sample. That direct DNA evidence, 2 samples collected from a coffee cup and a soda can that Ryan threw into a public trash can, was then presented to the court as conclusive proof that perfectly matched Profile X, the profile already present on the van, the victim's belongings, and the zip ties recovered from the crime scene. The jury was clearly walked through the lawful collection process and the chain of custody integrity of those samples. When the trial moved to the description of the Mount Carmel excavation site, the forensic team detailed exactly how they located the 2 bodies in the precise locations described by Ryan, as well as the marks consistent with restraint by zip ties, completing the connection to the earlier physical evidence. Forensic experts logically reconstructed the offender's sequence of actions, approaching the victims, gaining control of them, driving the van to Quinnipiac to mislead investigators, then transporting the bodies to a remote wooded area to bury them. While the prosecution presented a consistent and cohesive narrative, the defense attempted to argue that Ryan's initial confession was made while he was in a state of psychological collapse, and that the DNA evidence only proved Ryan had contact with the items, not that he committed murder. However, the presence of Ryan's DNA on multiple pieces of evidence scattered across locations, combined with his own statements about the burial sites and the complete absence of any trace of another person in the same chain of events, significantly undermined the defense's arguments. After 2 weeks of trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict that Ryan Talbert was guilty on all 3 counts: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and destruction of evidence. In early 2022, the judge handed down the sentence, imposing life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, stressing that the extreme gravity of the crime, the prolonged suffering inflicted on the victims' families, and the deliberate efforts to conceal the bodies fully justified the maximum penalty. The sentence officially closed the case nearly 15 years after Elena and Liam disappeared. The Connecticut State Police declared the case fully resolved in March 2022, closing one of the longest-running and most complex cold cases in the history of the state's investigative unit. The story of the Elena Marquez and Liam Porter case clearly reflects the challenges and real-world lessons that American society still faces today, from personal safety and the limitations of traditional investigation to the unexpected yet critically important role of modern technology. A case that dragged on for nearly 15 years, starting with what seemed like an ordinary trip between West Hartford and New Haven, serves as a reminder that danger can strike in the most familiar environments. The discovery of the Ford Aerostar at Quinnipiac, along with items left scattered at a park, a bar, and a bus station, shows a hard truth: the smallest details of daily life, where you go, at what time, and which routes you take, can become life-saving clues when something goes wrong. The investigative deadlock that lasted from 2007 to 2015 accurately reflects the challenges faced by the American justice system in the pre-technology era. But the breakthrough achieved through DNA, snapshot phenotyping, and especially genetic genealogy delivers another vital lesson in the digital age: personal data, including genetic data, can become a powerful tool to protect the community when used properly. Tracing Profile X through GED match not only solved the case, but also highlighted the importance of responsibility and transparency in sharing genetic data. Ultimately, the sentence handed down to Ryan Talbert reminds us that no matter how many years a criminal manages to evade justice, the American legal system, combined with technological progress, is still capable of bringing the truth to light. The profound takeaway from the entire story is this: always stay alert, always share your travel plans with loved ones, and understand that in an increasingly complex society, technology can be the most important ally we have in protecting our own safety. Thank you for following the story to the end. If you found this case-breaking journey meaningful, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. See you in the next video, where we'll continue uncovering chilling mysteries from the still open case files across America.